Boardroom Bound, Episode 32. Can you be married to the boardroom? With Bob and Leslie Dahl.
That's been really meaningful to me to not just be a name on a board, but to actually be very, very involved with these organizations.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give new and aspiring directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's show, we've got a special treat. This is the first time we're having a couple join, not one individual, but two people join as guests, have a dialogue back and forth, husband and wife who are both on tons of boards and work together to figure out what boards they should be on. So Bob and Leslie Dahl will be joining us, and Bob is the Chief Equity Strategist and Senior Portfolio Manager at Nuveen Asset Management. Prior to that, he held similar roles at other large asset management firms, including Chief Equity Strategist at BlackRock. And Bob is on a number of boards, including the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, the Word of Life Fellowship, New Canaan Society, Kingdom Advisors, National Christian Foundation, Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, the Lausanne Movement, the New York City Leadership Center, Carn University, and the Princeton Healthcare System. So Bob is breadth. He has lots of different boards. Leslie's, we'll see, is more depth. So Leslie has a heart and a passion for global ministry, primarily in the Middle East and North Africa. She is a resource partner for the Strategic Resource Group, committed to mobilizing the resources into the greater Middle East, and she's constantly traveling throughout the region and serving on their board, and she's also the co-founder of the Lausanne Orthodox Initiative. In addition, she's a board of trustee for the Lawrenceville School in New Jersey and the Committee for Religious Ministries at the University Medical Center in Princeton. And in today's show, we're going to explore a number of topics, and it's great to hear two different contrasting stories of Bob, who has double-digit number of boards, but Leslie has a few where she is focused. Both are going to talk about how finding an opportunity where it's a mission that you're passionate about, that you can be fully involved in and engaged in and bring your best self to, will be essential. It's going to be a wonderful story to hear of people who are true to themselves, know themselves, and how they find the boards that are a right fit for them. So let's jump into the show. Well, Bob and Leslie Dahl, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And we were joking beforehand that this is our first couples podcast. Very excited about that for our audience before. We've had individual interviews and lots of great conversations, but I'm really excited for them to understand what it's like from people who are thinking about how do we spend our time and our talents? Where do we invest that? And individuals do that, but a family structure is larger. There are implications for it. Do we take on another opportunity? Do we think about diving deeper? And for both of you, you've gone through that journey of getting your first seat, getting multiple seats. How do you want to spend that time and your energy? So I'm excited to be able to share that today. And we've heard in the intro, Bob, your list is longer than my arm. I'm a tall person, so I've got a long arm for lots of board roles. And Leslie, yours is more, I would call it focused and intentional, and you do very deep dive into the groups that you're working with. I think that'll be great to compare and contrast, but maybe we could just start out, if maybe both of you could give a little bit of a primer, if you think back in time to what was my first board role and how did I either volunteer for it or get talked into it? Maybe it was a voluntold type thing. Who would like to go first, Bob or Leslie?
I'm happy to start. My first board experience, I don't even know how many years ago. It's been quite a while ago. Word of Life Fellowship, located in Scroon Lake, New York. We as a family had been visiting Word of Life for a week every summer ever since our kids were infants, and took an interest in the work. And I don't remember the first time they knocked on my door, called me on the phone, said, "Would you be on the board?" And we deferred for a while and finally decided for a bunch of reasons it was time. And so I joined that board and have enjoyed the experience ever since.
And Leslie, what was it like for you when you got your first board role?
Well, I remember about 10 years ago, Bob and I were struggling with some of our financial stewardship and really struggling with I was feeling like I was just writing checks and was not really involved in any of the ministries or organizations that we were helping to fund. And I was rebuked by a friend who encouraged me to do a deep dive with one of these organizations, and which one would I aspire to be on the board, and it really caused my thinking to change, and to realize that I'm not going to really want to be involved with these organizations unless I actually get involved with them and go deep and find out more. And so since that time, I did do that, and I joined the Strategic Resource Group board, and Lausanne Orthodox Initiative founded that, and I'm on that board. And those are just organizations that are really precious to me, that I do a lot of on-the-ground work with, and I'm very close to. So that's been really meaningful to me to not just be a name on a board, but to actually be very, very involved with these organizations.
So Leslie, I love this. Let me pick on this thread a little bit, because for some of our listeners, I don't want to call it a Machiavellian thing, but you're thinking, I will get a nonprofit where not only can I get experience and help them, but it will be a springboard for me to something else. And the way that you've described it, if I paraphrase it here, is I want to find an organization whose mission I believe in, who I am a backer of, and not just financially, but want to give my time and my talents to, I really want to help them grow and develop. I imagine having that mentality when you join a board changes the way that you work with it and the way that you're involved and the energy you bring to the time and the tasks at hand. Can you talk us to a little bit more about that? Because you've probably seen not only as yourself going through that, but perhaps as that group has brought other board members on.
Yes, I would say that is really my philosophy, and the only way that I can personally feel not only like accountable to the board, but just enriched as a person and used by the Lord in being part of the organization. And I have been a part of one board that I've really enjoyed over the last 8 years, but I was beginning to feel that my value to the board was going down. My enthusiasm was not as high as my standard would be, and that I was probably not looking forward to spending the time at board meetings over the past couple of years. And I've just actually gone off that board this month, and it was a good run, and it was really good at the time, but they don't always last for your whole life either. There's a period of time and a season of time, and when I can feel the enthusiasm waning and the kind of usefulness to the board dropping, then it is a signal that for me that I need to let someone else be that enthusiastic contributor that can bring something really strong to the board.
And that makes a lot of sense. And Bob, if we contrast that, you talked about the first group that you joined, and I think you're still on their board. So maybe some of them are for life. And what was it like for you as you said they knocked on your door and they approached you and you joined the board? It sounded like perhaps not coming in with that same sort of zeal that Leslie has brought to her first board role, but I'm sure you learned from that and thought of, I should know this before I accept the next board role, or these are the right opportunities or maybe not the right opportunities for me. What was the learning curve like for you?
So the reluctance, if there was any, was simply a matter of, do I have the time? Mm-hmm. That with a full-time, 9-to-5 job, as it were, makes it very difficult to make every meeting and do the work between board meetings that makes you a good board board member. So that was my only reluctance. I've loved every minute most minutes. Some of the governance part can get tedious, but the strategic review, where we are, where we're heading, challenges, that's invigorating for me, no matter which of the boards we're talking about. So it was a time issue, Alexander.
And when people think about board roles, they often tend to think of large public companies like at J.P. Morgan, where I used to work, or something like that. You're talking maybe 300 hours a year, something like that. It's a massive commitment. And even on a nonprofit, it depends on the size of its national, regional, et cetera, but it's still meant to be a significant commitment. And Bob, you've expanded from that first to have quite a few under your belt. So what are your top tips of balancing that with a very big Wall Street type career? How are you finding the time to do the additional opportunities? I imagine for a lot of our people, even for that first board role, how do you carve that out to be effective and efficient?
With great difficulty, in all honesty. So the conversations I've had as boards have approached, or organizations have approached me, is I can be a board member, but A, I can't commit to every meeting. B, I will be more helpful to you on certain parts of the organization, less on others. So lean on me for those and release me from the others. And some have said, no, that's not acceptable, which I fully understand. Others said, absolutely, that's what we want. Good boards have diversity of thought, diversity of talent, but unity of spirit, I guess I'd put it. And so it's been take each board opportunity uniquely by itself and figure out where and how can I commit, how can I say yes, and have the upfront, honest conversation with the people asking you, so they understand what you're going to do when you get there. If you got to be at absolutely every meeting, I'll pass on that board, as it were.
I think that's really good advice, because for many people, especially if they're seeking their first board role, it's probably whatever offers me first I should take, because that will get that snowball effect going downhill. It'll build and take up steam. But I imagine for both of you, having been on lots of organizations and watched new people come in, you probably also have the other perspective now of having probably done some of the interviewing and made some of the decisions and thinking why this person's a good fit. And clearly, Leslie, we talked a bit about is your intentionality, your passion, your mission, your zeal. But Bob, you also made some good points here. Is it a good cultural fit? Does that work in terms of your attitude and approach? What are your thoughts from the board perspective of how do we find the right candidate? Because I think that will help all of our audience think, well, how do I make sure that I present myself well, but also that I am a good fit?
I'm happy to start there. I would say I'm assuming, and the boards I'm on, with one exception, are faith-based and Christian in focus. So I start with, does this person have a close personal walk with Jesus Christ? Are they living for Him? That's important. I would say also, does the person in question understand and support the vision, the mission of the organization? Do they add to those of us as a board? In other words, if we're all of the same background and the same way of thinking, maybe we need some diversity on our board in lots of different ways. We need, as I said a minute ago, unity of spirit, but diversity of thought is absolutely key. Then there are the practical things of what does one bring to a board. Some are stronger in the areas of thinking and strategy. Some have wealth, which most organizations need. Some can actually roll up their sleeves and do the work, and some can do some combination of those things. So can these folks partner with the strategic direction of the ministry? That's the list I kind of have in my mind.
And I would add to that, just have they been involved, over some period of time, demonstrated, a passion for the work, for the ministry, for the organization. Because I always find it difficult when people are suggested that just out of the blue, I don't resonate as much with that, whereas some organizations do that. And because of this diversity factor, it's important to me when we're looking for board members to find people that, we kind of already know a little bit, and we can grow them into the board role, but with a foundation of some sort of involvement and some sort of interest, whether it's financial or whether it's in the trenches, or whether it's, at meetings and conferences, et cetera, just that demonstrated interest and commitment to the organization.
I think that makes sense on so many levels, Leslie, because we know the vast majority of board seats are filled by personal networks. It's ideal to have a known quantity, understand their strengths, their commitment to the organization. So imagine some of the people in our audience are thinking, I would love to be on the board of the YMCA someday, whatever it might be. So clearly being involved in the YMCA community, not only as a donor, but volunteer days and whatnot, making sure that you understand them and they understand you probably makes for a better fit later on. So I think that makes great sense. And I imagine for some people, they're probably sitting going, but how do you really start? How do you raise your profile to be such that a board would be aware of you and think of you? So Leslie, if we take that and maybe just probe it a little bit further, take one of the groups that you're involved with now, maybe the resource group and strategic resource group, how would someone actually show themselves to be, I'm the type of person you would love to consider to be on the board?
Right. So my boards tend to be not very cookie cutter by nature, but for strategic resource group, this one, we would really want someone who was willing to travel a little bit and go visit some of our partners in the Middle East that we're working with, people that maybe come to our yearly summits that we bring our partners from the Middle East to discuss the ministries. Another board that I'm on, it would be important to have the people, part of the fundraising. A lot of organizations do an annual fundraising event, so be a part of that, or go visit the community that the the organization is ministering to. I mean, that kind of thing. It's so much more than just maybe spending $50 a year. I mean, getting involved. You just have to go on their website, pick up the phone, find out ways, volunteer with the organization to find out kind of, well, what do they actually really do, and who is the leadership, and then you find out more whether you're really drawn toward that, or whether it's just it's maybe not a fit.
And that makes sense. And Bob, so you're on a wide range of boards, right? I might be approaching double digits at this point. Do you see any common themes across yours of sort of the best practices of how someone begins to position themselves for that opportunity?
I'm not going to echo what Leslie says. If it's someone who has not demonstrated any interest, either by showing up or volunteering or donating or sending people to the organization in some way, why would we even consider them? It's got to be somebody that's in train, as it were. And I describe those people as insiders in some way, shape, or form. They naturally can be onboarded because they care, they love the organization, they love the leadership, whatever combination of those things. They're the prerequisites in my view.
And that all makes sense. And I would love to just pivot this slightly, because one of the things that intrigued me about this conversation was I know how close you are, and I know how much you talk about opportunities, and you're involved with things that are near and dear to your heart. And you probably get approached many times for new opportunities like this. But I encourage everyone in our audience to have that abundance mentality, right? Things will eventually come and find you. And you have to figure out what is right to take on, where do you stop and take something else. And Leslie, you were talking about changing some of those before. How do you work through that as a couple and wrestle? Because clearly you have busy lives already. You have 3 children that you're trying to raise. How do you as a couple work through those opportunities, knowing what you know about the implications of being on a board?
I used this phrase to an earlier question, with great difficulty. It's a back and forth. It's a discussion process. It's never black and white. Sometimes, at least with me, given the extended number of boards, is okay, if I'm going to go on this new one, is there one I'm going to say I've done all I can for that board and move on? I think that we recognize, and we established this in the answer to your very first question, Leslie, if she's involved. She goes deep and would be frustrated with the kind of involvement I have with some of my boards where I don't make every meeting, and I'm kind of a consultant almost. So it all depends what the onboarding process looks like, that expectations are set correctly in both directions, not only with board, but with spouse.
And I would add to that, for me, Bob mentioned actually that he's not a gigantic fan of governance meetings, and I'm probably less of a fan of governance meetings. And actually the thought of sitting, for 3 days, 3 times a year, and that's sometimes just one organization, to multiply that, all you have to do is do the math, and it's like, you have to really be sure if you want to be able to spend the time and make the time just for the meetings, but then, in terms of, like, I'm in the trenches kind of person, and I want to spend my time, deep diving in it, and so it adds a whole other level and layer of time that I think is extremely well spent, but it is hard to work in. And so I've probably definitely said no to more boards than I've said yes to, and it does have to cycle through that. Am I willing to sit through the meetings, and am I willing? Will I have the opportunity to contribute somewhere in the field or on the ground or in the trenches with that organization, and can my contribution really be impactful, or maybe not so much? So it takes a lot of consideration.
Alexander, I would also add that, as you know, most good boards have terms. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of a term, sometimes they're renewable, a conversation should be had between the chair of the board and the member who's considered renewal. does this make sense in both directions? Am I adding value to you? Are you picking up value from me? Does it make sense to do another term? And the answer isn't always yes.
Right. No, that makes absolute sense. And I would love if you could both give a little context around this. I think there's an assumption by people perhaps listening to this podcast that it naturally happens if you join a board and you do well. It builds a network because the people you're on boards with know other people and other boards approach you. You're both getting approached to be on other boards. Is that how it works, or does it come out in a different way? What has your experience been?
Almost uniformly, the board approaches us. I don't think I've ever asked to be on a board. The board, someone on the board, probably the person you're closest to, or the CEO of the organization, or the chair of the board, calls you and says, we sure could use you, and you would be able to do X, Y, and Z, and what do you think? And you begin almost a courting process where you figure out, is this where God wants me? Is this a good use of my time, my energy, my resources?
Yeah, that is exactly the same for me. And I think sometimes it starts with whether we've given a financial gift, or if we've been to their yearly, meetings, if we've might know the CEO or the director, and those networks have built over years and years and years. So it is something that starts when you're young and you develop those networks on and on. So I would also say don't be too keen to start too early. It takes a while to develop those networks who you actually want to dive deep with.
And there are seasons in life, which Leslie's inferring, where there were times in life where the thought of a board never crossed our minds because we were too, quote, busy doing other things. It's getting established in career, bringing up young kids, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. So there's a time and a season for everything, as the good book tells us.
I would just add that sometimes we think that being on a board is the ultimate, participation and ultimate stamp of approval for an organization or a ministry. And actually, I've had experience where I've said no to a board because I feel like my value to the organization is better by being someone on the outside and not someone on the inside. So when you go to a meeting or a conference or a president's gathering, and you've got all the board members speaking or all the employees speaking, and you have a group of people out there who are considering, sort of partnering with this organization, sometimes it's better to hear from a peer as opposed to a board member or an employee. And so those are also thoughts that I've had in my mind that, where best will I be able to contribute to this organization? And it's not always on the board.
That's a very good point. And as we sort of look back where you've been and where you've started, and clearly you're going to be continuing to be on boards, and those are going to grow and change, the world is different than it was when you started your board career, if I can call it that. And it will continue to evolve and change. Bobby, you talked about diversity of thought before. Diversity is the hot topic in so many different ways for boards these days. More on cybersecurity, more on social media, all these activities. What are the insights that you both are gleaming now from what your boards are wrestling with that will continue to be the challenge, you think, for the next few years, especially for our audience in the sense of, if you can become an expert or bring knowledge around those areas, you would be highly desirable?
You just touched on them. The amount of time boards and organizations now spend on the list that you put out there. A lot more compliance issues, regulatory issues, perception issues that have to be discussed and dealt with. A couple decades ago, that didn't happen a whole lot. So that creates a whole new layer of administrative responsibilities that have to be worked through. You asked in your question, challenges for boards. Some boards I'm on, the board tries to micromanage the organization, and that is a temptation that has to be fought. I can only imagine how frustrating it is for the senior management of the full-time people when a board tries to run the organization. So part of when I have the opportunity to speak to prospective board members is to test a bit, are they going to be one of those got to be in the weeds? That's not appropriate for a board. If you want to manage an organization, go for it, but don't come on our board and try to micromanage.
Right.
And I'm not on any really boards of large organizations, so the organizations I'm with tend to be smaller. And just like you said, we are always finding valuable people who are savvy with social media. The giving strategies, because as a board, you're always concerned about your, the resources that are coming into the organization and how you can contribute and increase that. And, just strategies involving social media are important to younger generation. And I would say anyone who's listening that's, millennial or young adult, boards are looking for people your age because boards tend to be stacked with middle-aged and older people, and so they're great opportunities. Communications, all the whole new social media. We know about it, but it's these young people that really know how to do it well and how to leverage that in the organization to improve it.
And I imagine one other way we might also talk about difference would be local versus national or even international, right? So, Leslie, for example, being on the Lawrenceville School as a trustee is very different from when you're working with an organization that's over in the Middle East and Africa, and how you manage that and how you're involved, and perhaps different things matter more. Can you give a little context for someone, as perhaps this would help them think about the type of organization they'd like to be involved with?
Yes, so the Lawrenceville School has been a wonderful board that I've been on for a number of years, and it is different, very different than the others. And it's not only like a local organization here right in my town, but the majority of the board members are alumni of the school. And I'm not an alumni, I'm a parent of children that went to the school. So when you're in there are just very different circumstances to have to deal with. Like when you're on a board with people that have, like in a school where they've all gone to the school, they have a vested interest that looks a little bit different than your perspective because I had children and they actually went there. So how do you change direction if you have strategic, changes in the direction of the school, and what is that going to look like, and how do you manage that, and how do you help the thinking, because sometimes alumni can tend to have more of a group think than people from the outside. So we've been very deliberate in bringing other people in, and yet it's to have an institution that's 250 years old to be a part of, to steward for the next, hopefully, 250 years. It is an exciting place. We all believe in education, and we want to be able to contribute well to a school that has such a history. That stewarding that influence is important, not only for today, but for the next, probably 250 years.
Well said. And I wonder, as we begin to try to bring all of this together, right, and tie it together with a ribbon and a bow, do you have any parting advice for new and aspiring board members? What would you recommend?
I would say don't press. If you want to be on a board, express your interest in the organization, not the board. Contribute in some way, and the board eventually will come your way if it's appropriate. I've seen people that are just too hungry to be on the board, and that can be a turn-off to the current board, if you understand what I'm saying.
Is that like dating, Bob, when you don't want to chase too hard, you got to play the game?
I guess it's the same principle, my friend. So that's one piece of advice. The second, I'll reiterate what I said before. There's a time and a season. Being on approximately 10 boards in my 60s is different than having contemplated that in my 40s. It would have been crazy for life and work and so on. And the third thing I'd say is, most board work should, that may be a little strong, be an extension of your life. That I'm on Kingdom Advisors Board. That's a group of financial advisors. Well, I'm in the investment management business, and I'm a Christian. So it's a natural extension of who I am. Very different from if I was going to be on the board of some reservation out in the Midwest somewhere that I know nothing about and probably never been to. So think about what makes sense given how God has gifted you and your experience sets.
I would agree with that, and I would say that part about the board being an extension of your life is so true, and it's so fulfilling when it is that way. And so my two pieces of advice would be get involved. Really find something that you're passionate about, and get involved in whatever way that looks like, and sort of be satisfied with that. Like really do well and contribute and be passionate, but also find a place where you actually really like the people, because it is an extension of your life, and we're finding that we can be part of a game-changing experience when you can partner well with your board members and with your organization all together in a really positive way. And when you look forward to it, and you look forward to being with these people, and you look forward to contributing together to make a game changer for whatever the vision and the mission of that organization is. And then it's just a fulfilling way to spend your time in your life.
I would agree with that, and I think we're actually echoing one of the comments that came out in a previous episode. It's episode 9 with Doug McGray, where his whole point was, don't join a board to network. And in many ways is what you're saying, Leslie. Find something you're passionate about, you're going to do well in, you really want to serve that organization, and the networking will almost be a byproduct that will happen naturally, and it will help you. But that should not be your primary driver, because you won't bring your best self to the board if you do that.
I fully agree with that. Absolutely. And other board members can, you can detect when someone is there for ulterior motives and other purposes, and that doesn't help the board at all for that to happen, and it doesn't help the organization, and it doesn't help you. It doesn't really help anybody.
I think that makes great sense. And I am thrilled that we were able to have this first-of-a-kind dialogue on this show. This was great fun. And I imagine there might be some people would say, I would love to learn maybe the litany of organizations you're involved in. I'd love to learn more about some of these, and we could include them in the show notes. Is there one or two that you are most passionate about that you would love to see people know more about so we can include more information?
Well, if I name one or two, the others will be upset with me. But let me go there anyway. I'm going to mention the two boards where I happen to be chair at the moment, Alexander. And there are two movements. One is the Lausanne movement, which is an organization many Christians know about. It's global in nature. It is a movement, so it enables and encourages people and dialogue around lots of subjects, trying to literally evangelize the world, if you will. I know that's a grand thought. And the other is movement.org, the organization responsible for Movement Days, which is an attempt to accelerate the gospel in cities. We started with New York. Dallas came on board second. We've now served 24 cities around the globe. Have a list of about 100 cities that would like advice. How do we get ready for a movement day so we can accelerate the gospel in our city? So there'll be two I'd mention.
And I would mention Strategic Resource Group, which is a group of business people that are supporting indigenous ministry in the Middle East, the 9 priority countries, now particularly diving deep with the refugee crisis. We don't do anything, but we support indigenous pastors, churches, organizations. We find the generals that are doing the most impactful work for the kingdom, and we come alongside of them with prayer people and finances, and we're praying for Muslims to come to Christ and for transformation in the Middle East. And that's a really exciting place now, and we feel like the epicenter of where God is working at the moment. And then the other organization I'm involved, another one, is the Lausanne Orthodox Initiative, and that sprung out of the Lausanne conference in Cape Town in 2010. And it's a group of evangelicals and Orthodox around the world, and we get together to forge friendships and to see how together we can work in the mission of God around the world, where Orthodox countries, where Orthodoxy is primary over Protestantism or evangelicalism. And sadly, Protestants and Orthodox don't always get along, and they don't always work well together in the mission of God. But as the body of Christ, we're seeking to make a stronger, bolder presence, good witness, powerful witness in these countries for the gospel. And it's been really rich, because I never knew an Orthodox person in my life 10 years ago, and now I've got friends all around the world that we're working together for the same cause of Christ, and that's a good one.
Well, I think what we can take away from this is both of you just gave a couple examples of ones that you're passionate about, that align with your personal philosophies, and you can imagine getting behind that mission for yourselves is very easy and to be excited about. I think that's a great takeaway for all of us. And, Bob and Leslie, we were just delighted to have you on the show today, and thank you so much for sharing your insights and helping all of our audience to be more boardroom bound.
A real privilege for us.
Thank you, Alexander. It's been great.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with both Bob and Leslie Dahl. It was wonderful to hear two people who know themselves and their true value and where they best fit in helping another organization, and in parallel with that, finding organizations that are a right fit for them missionally and visionally, and then knowing where to spend their time and their energy, and hearing two different approaches. So Leslie is the few and focused in depth. Bob is a wide range of organizations where he can add specific values, but can't do the same degree and depth that Leslie does. Now remember, you can head over to podcast.gordon.edu where you can get links to all the resources that we talked about in today's episode. And if you enjoyed this episode or any other episode of the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you would open up iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play or wherever you're listening to this podcast and just take 30 seconds to leave an honest rating and review. This helps us get out word about the show. And stay subscribed and tune in every week because we're working hard to get top quality content out for you. So thanks for joining me in this episode of the show. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.